If you carry me upstairs, I'll tell you a secret, little black girl said to the billionaire. Then, hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The night was cold, the kind of bone-chilling cold that cuts through layers of clothing and sinks deep into your bones. The streets were quiet, the usual hum of traffic replaced by the soft crunch of snow underfoot. A few streetlights cast pale yellow pools of light across the sidewalk, but beyond that, the world seemed to fade into shadows. And there she was, a small girl, no older than 7, standing in front of a grand mansion. Her clothes were worn, and her shoes, too big for her feet, were tattered at the edges. She was clutching a small, crumpled bag in one hand, her other hand pressed against the cold metal of the gate. She stood still, as though waiting for something, waiting for someone. And then she spoke. If you carry me upstairs, I'll tell you a secret. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper, but it sliced through the night's silence. The man in the car, a billionaire, paused. He had just pulled up to his mansion, preparing to end his day in solitude. He had everything he could want: money, power, success. But somehow, his life felt empty. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, he wasn't sure what to do. The world around him seemed to slow down as he looked at the small, fragile figure standing in front of him. His heart, usually guarded and indifferent, skipped a beat. Was it pity? Was it curiosity? He wasn't sure. But something in that girl's voice, something in the way she spoke, stirred something deep within him. He got out of the car and walked toward her. What do you need? He asked, his voice softer than usual. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped back slightly, her eyes wide and alert, as though she was afraid he might change his mind. She looked up at him, her gaze steady, but filled with something he couldn't quite read. She was small, but there was something about her that felt much older. I just need to get inside, she said, her voice quivering. The billionaire looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, he said, bending down and gently lifting her into his arms. As he carried her up the steps, the weight of her small body against his chest felt heavier than he expected. It wasn't just her physical weight. It was something else, something he couldn't quite name. He could feel her heartbeat against his own, slow and steady, but there was an edge of fear in the way she held herself. The door to the mansion opened, and they stepped inside. The warmth hit him instantly, a stark contrast to the cold air outside. But as they crossed the threshold, something shifted. The girl didn't seem to relax. Her eyes darted around the grand entryway, but there was no sign of comfort in her expression. She was still tense, still guarded. What's the secret? He asked, setting her down gently on the floor. She didn't immediately answer. Instead, she glanced up at him, as though deciding how much to reveal. He waited, watching her, sensing there was more to this moment than he could understand. Finally, she spoke again, her voice barely audible. The secret is, I know who you really are. He blinked, taken aback. What do you mean? He asked, confused. But before she could answer, the sound of a door creaking open interrupted them. And that's when the truth began to unravel, in ways neither of them could have expected. The girl stood there, still frozen, her wide eyes locked onto the billionaire. The moment felt suspended in time. Her words hung in the air, thick with an undeniable weight. I know who you really are, she had said. Her voice, though small, felt like a thunderclap in the silent room. The billionaire, for the first time in a long while, felt the stirrings of something unfamiliar. Curiosity, unease, maybe even fear. He had lived his life surrounded by luxury, power, and control, but this little girl was doing something no one had ever managed before. She was unraveling him. He cleared his throat, trying to brush away the confusion. What do you mean? He asked, his voice low and steady. She didn't immediately respond. Instead, she just stared at him, as if deciding whether to speak the truth or remain silent. His eyes softened, and for a moment, he wasn't the billionaire tycoon. He was just a man, trying to make sense of the strange, unsettling situation he found himself in. She finally broke the silence. I know who you are because you saved my mom. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. The room seemed to tilt slightly, and for a split second, he was back in a time he had long buried. He didn't show it, but the mention of his mother sent a ripple of emotions through him. The girl looked up at him with those large, unblinking eyes, waiting for a response. She wasn't scared anymore. She wasn't intimidated by his wealth, his status, or the mansion that surrounded them. She was calm, almost serene, as though she had been carrying this truth for a long time and was finally letting it breathe. "Your mother?" he echoed, struggling to find his words. She nodded slowly. "Yes, she worked for you, and you gave her a second chance. That's why I know you, because you didn't let her fall." The billionaire's heart skipped a beat. His mind raced as pieces of the past began to fit together, but there was something he still couldn't grasp. His mind flashed to the countless people who had crossed his path over the years. But this girl, this moment, was different. She was connected to something deeper. His gaze softened. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Lila," she said simply, her small fingers playing with the edge of her worn jacket. "And my mom's name was Ruth." Ruth. He remembered her. Ruth had been a hard-working woman who had worked for him years ago, before she had disappeared from his life. He had never known what happened to her. She had always been quiet, humble, and unassuming, but there was something in her eyes that had stayed with him. He hadn't thought about Ruth in a long time. The world had moved on, but it seemed she had never truly left. Lila's words felt like the key to a door he had long since closed. "Ruth?" he repeated, almost whispering her name. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" Lila's eyes didn't waver. "I didn't know." "How?" "She didn't want me to, but I don't think she ever stopped being grateful for what you did." There was a heaviness in her words, as though she carried the weight of a promise made by someone else. The billionaire felt a flicker of something, a spark of recognition, perhaps. The kindness he had once shown to Ruth had somehow come full circle, reaching him in a way he couldn't have predicted. He sat down on the plush couch, his mind reeling. Lila sat beside him, still, but not nervously. She was simply waiting, letting the silence hang between them like a fragile thread. The fire crackled softly in the background, and for a moment, all the grandeur of the mansion felt distant, irrelevant. "What do you need, Lila?" The question slipped from his lips without him thinking. Lila looked at him, her expression unchanged. "I need to know that you'll keep your promise. That you'll look after me, like you promised my mom." The billionaire's heart tightened. He wasn't sure what he had promised Ruth all those years ago, but looking at Lila now, he felt a sense of responsibility flood him, something he had never felt so clearly before. He had been a man of ambition, always striving for more, but now he was confronted with a truth that felt both heavy and necessary. "I'll take care of you," he said, his voice firm, but soft. "I promise." Lila smiled then, a small, quiet smile, but it was enough to melt the walls he had built around himself. As she sat there beside him, something inside him shifted. He had been living a life of control, of power, of wealth. But here, with this little girl, he was finally confronted with something real, something human. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. And neither did Lila. "I have a place for you here. You can stay with me as long as you need to, Lila." The billionaire's voice was steady, but there was something about it that felt different now. It wasn't just an offer of shelter, it was a promise. Lila had been looking at him for a while, her expression unreadable, as if she were still trying to figure him out. She wasn't sure whether she should trust him, but his words, the tone of his voice, carried weight. It was as if something inside her was stirring, a small spark of hope. She looked down at her worn shoes, unsure of how to respond. Her life had been a series of moving from place to place, never staying too long anywhere. She had learned to guard herself, to not trust easily, especially when it came to people with money. But something about the billionaire made her pause. He wasn't like the others. She couldn't explain why, but she felt it. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He smiled softly, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "You don't have to say anything, Lila. I know it's a lot to take in, but you're safe now." Lila hesitated for a moment before looking up at him. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. She couldn't remember the last time someone had said that to her and truly meant it. The last few years of her life had been full of uncertainty, fear, and survival. She had been forced to grow up quickly, to fend for herself and her mom, never allowing herself to show weakness. But now, In this grand mansion, with the warmth of the fire crackling in the background and the promise of safety hanging in the air, she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't allowed in years: relief. The billionaire motioned for her to follow him, and they walked through the hallways of the mansion. The walls were adorned with rich tapestries, the floors polished to perfection. Everything about the place screamed wealth, but there was a sense of emptiness to it too. Lila couldn't help but notice how quiet it was, how vast and lonely the rooms felt. He led her to a cozy guest room with soft lighting and a bed that seemed like it could swallow her whole. There was a small desk, a chair, and a window with a view of the gardens outside. "You can stay here," he said, stepping back to give her space. "Make yourself at home." Lila stood still for a moment, taking it all in. The room was beautiful, peaceful even, but it felt like a dream. She wasn't used to such luxury, and the stark contrast between her past and this moment made her feel a little out of place. She walked over to the bed, running her fingers over the soft sheets. It felt so different from the old blankets she used to sleep under, so different from the cold, hard floors she had grown accustomed to. Her eyes fluttered shut for a moment, and in that brief instant, she let herself imagine a life where she didn't have to fight for every little thing. The billionaire stood by the door, watching her. "I'll be right outside if you need anything," he said softly before closing the door behind him. As the sound of his footsteps faded away, Lila sat on the edge of the bed, trying to push away the uncertainty creeping into her thoughts. Was this really happening? Was this just a temporary kindness? Or was he truly offering her a new beginning? She didn't know, but for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe it could be the start of something better. As she lay down on the bed, her body sinking into the soft mattress, her mind drifted back to her mother. Ruth had always been the strong one, the one who kept them going despite the odds. But now, Ruth was gone, and Lila was left to navigate this new world on her own. She couldn't help but wonder what her mom would have thought of the billionaire. Would she have trusted him? Or would she have been skeptical, like Lila had been at first? The more she thought about it, the more she realized how little she knew about him. But there was something about his presence, something about the way he had looked at her, that made her want to trust him. And for now, that was enough. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the room wrap around her like a blanket. For the first time in a long time, Lila felt like she could finally breathe. But as she drifted off to sleep, she had no idea that this was only the beginning of a journey that would change both her life and the billionaire's in ways neither of them could ever have imagined. "I have a plan for you, Lila," the billionaire said softly as he stepped into the room the next morning, his tone filled with a quiet resolve. Lila, still waking from the soft embrace of sleep, blinked at him, her eyes still heavy with the remnants of a dream she couldn't quite recall. She had spent the night in the softest bed she had ever known, her body sinking into the luxury of the sheets, and for the first time in a long time, she had slept without fear. But now, reality was pulling her back, and she couldn't help but feel a twinge of uncertainty. "A plan?" she asked, her voice still raspy from sleep. The billionaire nodded, his eyes reflecting the light from the window that bathed the room in warmth. "I'm going to make sure you have everything you need to succeed, Lila," he said, his words deliberate, each one chosen carefully. Lila sat up in bed, the blanket falling away from her shoulders, and looked at him with curiosity. "What do you mean?" she asked, her eyebrows furrowing slightly. He smiled at her, but it wasn't the same smile he had given her the night before. This one was filled with purpose. "I'm going to make sure you're safe, but I also want you to have a future, a chance to make something of yourself. You deserve that." Lila could feel the weight of his words, but a part of her, the part that had grown accustomed to fighting for every scrap of life, felt suspicious. She wasn't used to people offering things without expecting something in return. "How?" she asked, her voice quieter now, as if she feared the answer. The billionaire took a step closer, his expression softening. "I'm going to enroll you in school," he said simply. "You're going to have the chance to learn, to grow, to be more than just someone who survives. You'll have the opportunity to thrive." Lila blinked, taken aback by the suggestion. She had never been to a real school. She had been too busy taking care of her mom, too busy fighting to survive. And now, here she was, sitting in a mansion, being offered a chance at something she hadn't even dared to dream of. "But I don't know anything about school," she said, her voice small. "I never went." The billionaire smiled again, but this time, it was warmer, as if he understood exactly what she meant. You'll learn. I'll make sure you get the support you need. You'll have the best tutors, the best opportunities. I'll make sure of it. He paused, as if weighing his next words carefully. And you won't be alone. You'll have me, Lila. I'll help you every step of the way. The words felt strange coming from him, and for a moment, Lila wasn't sure if she could trust them. She had heard promises before, and they had always been broken. People had promised to help her, to take care of her, and yet, here she was alone. But something about the way he said it made her hesitate. Maybe, just maybe, this time was different. Why are you doing this for me? She asked quietly, her eyes searching his face for any hint of deception. The billionaire's expression softened, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that was both gentle and resolute. Because you deserve it, Lila, he said, his voice steady. Everyone deserves a chance. And I'm giving you that chance. Lila felt a lump form in her throat. She wasn't sure why, but there was something in his voice, in his words, that made her believe him. Maybe it was the sincerity in his eyes, or maybe it was the warmth that filled the room when he spoke. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel something other than fear. She felt hope. Okay, she whispered, barely believing the words as they left her lips. I'll try. The billionaire smiled, and this time, it was full of warmth. That's all I ask, Lila, he said. You just have to try. He turned and walked toward the door, his footsteps echoing softly in the quiet room. I'll have everything arranged for you. You don't have to worry about a thing. As he opened the door to leave, he glanced back at her. And Lila. She looked up at him, her heart beating a little faster. You're not alone anymore. Remember that. The door clicked softly behind him, and Lila sat there for a moment, staring at the spot where he had just been. Her heart raced in her chest, and she felt a strange mixture of emotions. Fear, excitement, hope. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of it. She was ready to face it, ready to take the chance he was offering her. A future, a real future. Maybe this was the start of something new. Maybe it was the chance. She had been waiting for all her life. But one thing was for sure. This time, she wouldn't be facing it alone. I had no idea what to expect when I stepped into the car the next morning. Lila sat beside me, her small frame wrapped in a coat that was too big for her, her hands clutching her backpack as if it were her lifeline. The weight of the promise I had made to her still hung heavy in the air. I had told her that I would help her, that I would make sure she got everything she needed to succeed. But the truth was, I didn't know where to start. I had the resources, the power, but could I really help a little girl like her? Could I give her the life she deserved? The car hummed softly as we drove through the city, the streets busy with the usual morning rush. Lila remained quiet beside me, her eyes focused out the window, her face a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. I could see the wariness in her expression. She didn't know what to make of all this, didn't know if she could trust me, and I didn't blame her. Trust was something that had to be earned, not given freely. As we approached the school, I could see it in her body language. She was nervous. Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of her jacket, and her legs bounced lightly under the seat. I couldn't help but feel a pang of empathy. It had been so long since I had felt like an outsider, so long since I had been that vulnerable, that unsure. We're here, I said gently as the car pulled up to the curb. Lila looked up at the school in front of her. It was an elite private institution, one that I had personally ensured she would be able to attend. But to her, it might as well have been another world. She was used to the streets, used to survival, not to privilege and luxury. I could tell by the way her eyes scanned the gates, the way she hesitated to step out of the car, that she wasn't sure she belonged here. You'll be fine, I said, trying to reassure her, though part of me wasn't sure if I believed that myself. She didn't respond immediately. She just nodded and unbuckled her seatbelt, slowly stepping out of the car. As she stood there, looking up at the tall, imposing school building, I felt a surge of protectiveness. I wanted to shield her from all the harsh realities of the world, to make sure she never had to go through the pain and hardship that had been her life up until now. But I couldn't do that. What I could do was give her a chance to build a future that wasn't defined by her past. We walked into the school together, and I could feel the tension in her body, the way she kept her eyes on the ground, avoiding contact with the other students who were milling about. They looked at her, Some with curiosity, some with pity, but most just ignored her. She didn't belong here, not yet. I could see it in the way they looked at her. I could see it in the way she carried herself, the weight of a life lived in the shadows. As we approached the entrance, a teacher greeted us, her smile polite but distant. I could tell she wasn't used to seeing someone like Lila in her school, and I couldn't blame her. This wasn't a place for someone like Lila, not on the surface. But I knew that could change. Lila, this is Mrs. Langford, I said, introducing them. Lila looked up at the teacher briefly, but didn't offer her hand. Mrs. Langford, sensing the tension, smiled and nodded. It's nice to meet you, Lila, she said, her voice warm but formal. Lila nodded back, her eyes cast downward, but she said nothing. I could feel the silence hanging between them, thick and awkward. She'll be joining us today, I said to Mrs. Langford, my voice firm. Mrs. Langford's smile faltered for just a second, but she quickly recovered, nodding again. Of course, we'll make sure she feels welcome. I could see the doubt in her eyes, the unspoken questions. She didn't believe it. She didn't think Lila belonged here. But I would make sure she did. Lila, I'll be right here when you finish for the day, I said, trying to reassure her. Just take it one step at a time. You're not alone in this. She didn't answer, but I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a small glimmer of hope, maybe. Or maybe it was just the start of a long, difficult journey. Either way, it was a start. I watched her walk into the building, her back straight, her shoulders tense, but her head held high. She might not believe it yet, but she had already begun to change. And so had I. I knew this wouldn't be easy. I knew that there would be obstacles along the way, that Lila would face challenges she hadn't yet imagined. But I also knew that she had the strength to overcome them, just like her mother had. And that strength would be enough. As I stood there watching her disappear into the school, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This was just the beginning of something new, something better. I had no idea where it would lead, but I knew one thing for sure. I was going to help her get there. I arrived at the school early that afternoon, just as the bell rang, signaling the end of the school day. The sight of the students pouring out of the building brought back memories of my own school days. Memories I had buried under years of work and success. I watched as Lila walked out of the school, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her head slightly down, but there was something different in her posture. A quiet strength that hadn't been there before. She wasn't smiling, but her walk was purposeful, like someone who had begun to find her place in the world. I could see the way other students looked at her, some out of curiosity, some with a hint of judgment, but most just ignored her, as they did with anyone who didn't quite fit the mold. She wasn't part of their world, not yet, but she would be. I knew that much. She caught sight of me as she stepped off the sidewalk and approached the car. There was a brief hesitation in her step, but she continued toward me, her face neutral, almost unreadable. How was school? I asked as she climbed into the car. Lila shrugged, not quite meeting my eyes. It was fine, she said, her voice lacking any real emotion. I nodded, not pushing her to talk more. I knew it would take time for her to open up, especially in a world that felt so foreign to her. But I could tell. She was trying. I know it's not easy, I said gently, glancing at her out of the corner of my eye as I started the car. But you're doing great. You'll get used to it. She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was just the quiet that came with understanding. We drove in silence for a few moments before I spoke again. You know, I've been thinking, I said, trying to break the silence. You've had a lot to deal with, Lila. I know it hasn't been easy, but you don't have to go through this alone. I'm here to help you, not just with school, but with everything. Lila glanced over at me, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite place. It was a mixture of caution and curiosity. I didn't ask for your help, she said quietly, her tone almost defensive. I sighed. I know you didn't. But that's what I'm here for. To help you when you need it, even if you don't ask. She didn't respond to that. Instead, she looked out the window, her face reflecting the passing scenery. The tension that had been in the car earlier seemed to ease, but I could tell she was still processing everything. I knew it wasn't going to be easy for her to trust me, or anyone for that matter. Trust was something she had lost a long time ago. We pulled up to the house, the large estate that she was still adjusting to. It felt like a different world to her, a world she wasn't sure she belonged in. As we walked inside, I noticed the way she hesitated before stepping over the threshold. She wasn't sure if it was real, if this was really her life now. She had been in survival mode for so long that the idea of a stable home, a safe place, was foreign to her. But I was determined to change that. "Come on," I said, gently urging her forward. "I want to show you something." I led her into the kitchen, where I had already arranged a small surprise for her. On the counter, there was a plate of freshly made cookies, still warm, with a glass of milk beside them. "I thought you might like a snack," I said with a small smile. Lila's eyes widened, but she didn't immediately go for the cookies. She stood there, staring at them for a moment, as if unsure of how to react. "You don't have to," I said, trying to ease her hesitation. "But you're welcome to have one." Slowly, she stepped forward, almost cautiously, and picked up a cookie. She took a small bite, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something that looked like contentment in her eyes. It was fleeting, but it was there. I watched her as she ate, her movements careful, almost tentative. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice softer than usual. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I felt a sense of pride in that small moment. It was a small victory, but it was a step toward her feeling at home here. After a few minutes, she finished the cookie and set the plate down, her eyes meeting mine. "I'm not sure I belong here," she said, her voice hesitant but honest. I nodded, understanding her uncertainty. "It's going to take time," I said gently. "But you're here now, and you have a place with me. You belong here, Lila. Don't ever forget that." She didn't answer right away, but I could see her thinking. She wasn't ready to fully believe it yet, but I could tell she was starting to consider it. That was all I could ask for right now. A small step forward. That night, as she went to bed in her new room, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. This was just the beginning of a journey, and there were still many obstacles ahead, but I had no doubt that Lila was capable of so much more than she realized, and I was going to make sure she had every chance to reach it. I was sitting in my office the next morning when the call came. The phone rang once, twice, and then a voice, unfamiliar but urgent, spoke through the receiver. "Mr. Grayson, there's something you need to see." I felt my chest tighten. I had been expecting a call, but not like this. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "It's about Lila," the voice said, and just those 3 words made my heart race. I stood up, my mind spinning. "What's happened?" I asked, my words clipped, impatient. "She's in trouble, sir. You need to come quickly." I hung up without another word, my pulse pounding in my ears. I grabbed my coat and rushed out the door, the urgency in my steps mirroring the panic in my chest. As I drove to the school, my mind raced with possibilities. Had she been hurt? Was she in some kind of trouble? I had promised her a chance, a better life, but I couldn't help but wonder if I was failing her already. When I arrived, I found her standing outside the principal's office, her eyes fixed on the ground, her arms crossed over her chest. Her posture was defensive, closed off, as if she were bracing for something bad. I could see the tension in her body, the way her shoulders were hunched, the way her jaw was clenched. She didn't look up as I approached. "Lila," I said softly, crouching down so I was eye level with her. "What happened?" She didn't answer right away, her gaze still fixed on the floor. I could see her fighting with herself, unsure whether to speak, unsure of what to say. "It's not what you think," she finally muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I reached out and gently touched her arm, a gesture of reassurance. "You're not in trouble, Lila. Just tell me what happened." Slowly, she lifted her head, her eyes meeting mine. There was a flicker of uncertainty in them, but there was something else too, something I hadn't seen before. Fear. "There were these kids," she began, her voice trembling slightly. They've been calling me names. Saying I don't belong here. Saying I don't fit in." I felt a pang in my chest as the weight of her words settled over me. I knew that school wasn't easy for her. She was different. She was an outsider in a world that expected conformity. But I hadn't realized how deeply that difference was affecting her. "And what happened today?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. They pushed me," she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "They shoved me into the lockers." I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to make it worse. My blood ran cold. I had known that Lila's journey here wasn't going to be easy, but hearing this, knowing that she was facing this kind of bullying, made something inside me snap. "You should have come to me," I said, my voice softer now, though there was a hard edge to it. You don't have to fight this alone, Lila. You don't have to deal with it on your own. She didn't say anything, but I could see her eyes searching mine, looking for something. Looking for reassurance, for comfort. We'll deal with this, I said firmly, standing up. I'll make sure it stops. You're not alone in this. She looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. I don't want anyone to think I'm weak, she finally said, her voice barely audible. I don't want to be the girl who needs someone to help her all the time. I smiled softly, trying to ease the tension in the room. You're not weak, Lila, I said, my voice gentle. Asking for help doesn't make you weak. It makes you strong. And you don't have to do everything on your own. You have people who care about you. She didn't answer, but I could see the change in her eyes. The way she seemed to soften, just a little. She was beginning to trust me, and that was a step in the right direction. I turned to the principal's office door and knocked softly. The door opened, and the principal, a woman in her late 40s with a stern but kind expression, looked at me. Mr. Grayson, she said, her voice calm but serious. We need to talk. I followed her into her office, Lila by my side. As we sat down, the principal explained the situation. The bullying was more widespread than I had thought. It wasn't just a few kids. There was a group of students who had been picking on Lila for weeks, targeting her for being different. I felt a surge of anger rise within me. This wasn't just about Lila anymore. It was about making sure no one else had to face this kind of treatment. We'll handle this, the principal said, her voice firm. We'll make sure this stops. I nodded, but I wasn't satisfied. I couldn't just let it go. I want to be involved, I said, my voice steady. I want to make sure this is addressed, and I want to know exactly what steps you're taking. The principal nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Of course, we'll keep you informed. As I left the school that afternoon, Lila beside me, I felt a sense of resolve wash over me. This wasn't just about giving her a chance at a better future. It was about protecting her, about making sure she was safe and that she knew she was valued. And I wasn't going to stop until she believed it. This was a fight I wasn't going to lose. I watched Lila over the next few days, observing how she started to adjust, albeit reluctantly, to the changes in her life. There were moments of quiet rebellion, moments when she would close off, retreating into herself, but there were also small steps forward. I could see the way she tried to keep up with her schoolwork, the way she listened to the tutors I'd arranged for her, though her attention often wandered. She wasn't used to being given this kind of support, this kind of care, and I could tell it made her uncomfortable. The school had taken steps to address the bullying situation, and the students involved had been reprimanded. But it wasn't just the school that had to change, it was Lila too. She had to believe that she was worthy of the space she was taking up, of the life she was being offered. One evening, after a long day of school, I found her sitting alone in the garden. She was staring out at the landscape, her legs drawn up to her chest, her arms wrapped around her knees. The cool evening air seemed to match the solemnity in her posture. I sat down beside her without saying a word, just letting the silence between us stretch out. She didn't flinch or try to push me away. She simply sat there, lost in her own thoughts. How was your day? I asked gently, not wanting to push her, but hoping she would share something. She looked at me, her eyes tired. It was fine, she said, her voice flat. But I don't really belong there. Not like the others. I could hear the frustration in her tone, the quiet battle she was having inside her head. You do belong there, Lila, I said, my voice firm, though I kept my tone soft. You belong wherever you choose to be. She turned her head slightly, her gaze meeting mine, and for a moment, I could see the vulnerability in her eyes. It's not that easy, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. People look at me like I'm different, like I don't fit in. I took a deep breath, knowing that this wasn't going to be an easy conversation. You are different, I said slowly. But that's not a bad thing. In fact, it's one of the things that makes you special. Don't let anyone make you feel like you have to be like everyone else to fit in. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the grass beneath her feet. I wasn't sure if she fully understood what I was saying, but I could see the wheels turning in her mind. I just don't want to be alone, she said after a while, her voice tinged with a sadness I hadn't heard before. I don't want to feel like I'm always on the outside looking in. My heart ached for her in that moment. She was so young, yet she had already experienced so much pain, so much rejection. You're not alone, Lila, I said quietly. You're not alone anymore. She glanced at me, her expression softening. But what if they don't accept me? She asked, her voice full of doubt. What if I never belong? It's not about their acceptance, I said, my voice steady. It's about you accepting yourself. When you believe in who you are, others will see that. They'll respect you, and you'll find your place, even if it takes time. Lila was silent for a moment, her eyes focused on the ground, her fingers absently picking at the grass. I could see the weight of everything she had been through, everything she was carrying, but I also saw the strength in her. The strength that had kept her going, even when it seemed like the world was against her. I'll try, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll try to believe in myself. I smiled softly, a mixture of pride and relief flooding through me. That's all I'm asking, Lila. Just try. One step at a time. The evening settled into quiet after that. We sat together in the garden for a while longer, the sounds of the night surrounding us. Lila didn't say much after that, but I could tell she was thinking. I wasn't sure if she had fully understood everything I had said, or if she believed it yet. But I had seen a shift in her, a tiny crack in the walls she had built around herself. And that, I knew, was the beginning of something important. The next day, Lila came home from school with a small smile on her face. It wasn't a big smile, not a joyful one, but it was something. A sign that maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe what I had told her. The road ahead would still be difficult. She would still face challenges, still face moments where she doubted herself. But I knew that with each step, she was getting closer to finding her place, closer to finding the strength within herself to move forward. And I would be there, every step of the way, supporting her, watching her grow, watching her become the person she was always meant to be. I watched Lila carefully as the days went on. There were subtle changes in her, small steps that showed she was beginning to embrace her new life. She was still hesitant, still unsure about where she fit in, but there was a quiet determination in her that hadn't been there before. It was like she was slowly starting to realize that she was capable of more than just surviving. She could thrive. One afternoon, as I walked into the living room, I found her sitting on the floor, drawing. Her sketchbook was filled with colorful shapes, swirling patterns, and what looked like abstract designs. I hadn't seen her this focused before, and I couldn't help but smile. "What are you drawing?" I asked, leaning against the doorway. She looked up at me, her eyes brightening for a moment before returning to her sketch. "Just some stuff," she said quietly, her hand moving quickly over the page. "Stuff I think about." I walked over to her, sitting down beside her. "Can I see?" I asked. She hesitated for a moment, but then she nodded and turned the sketchbook toward me. The images on the page were chaotic, yet there was a kind of beauty in the disarray. Some were faces, others were landscapes, and a few were just shapes that seemed to have no real meaning. But they were hers, and in that moment, I could see a piece of her, pieces of her thoughts, her emotions, things she hadn't spoken about. "This is really good, Lila," I said, my voice gentle. "You have a lot of talent." She glanced up at me, her face softening slightly. "I don't know. I just draw what's in my head," she said, almost as if it was no big deal. "It's not that special." "It is special," I said, my tone firm. "You're special, Lila, and I'm going to make sure you know that." She didn't respond, but I saw the flicker of something in her eyes, maybe a hint of belief, a small spark of confidence that hadn't been there before. For a moment, we sat in silence, the only sound the soft scratching of her pencil against the paper. I could see her getting lost in her drawings, losing herself in the creativity, and I couldn't help but feel proud. This was a side of her I hadn't seen before, the side that had the potential to soar, to be more than what the world had made her believe she was. The following week, I took her to a local art gallery. It wasn't the biggest or the most famous, but it was a place where young artists could showcase their work, and I thought it might be a good opportunity for Lila to see what was possible if she pursued her art. I didn't tell her ahead of time what we were doing. I wanted it to be a surprise. As we walked through the door, Lila's eyes widened in surprise. She looked at the paintings on the walls, the vibrant colors, the intricate designs. She was silent for a moment, taking it all in, and I could see the wonder in her eyes. "These are amazing," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "I could never do something like this." I smiled, putting a hand on her shoulder. "You already do, Lila. Your drawings are just as good as these." She turned to look at me, her face unsure. "Do you really think so?" she asked, almost disbelieving. I nodded. I know so. And I think you have the potential to be even better. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur, Lila looking at the artwork with a mix of admiration and longing. I could see her mind racing, imagining what it would be like to have her work displayed on a wall, to have others admire it, just as she admired the art around her. It was the first time I saw her look at her own potential with anything other than doubt. As we left the gallery, she looked up at me, her face serious. I want to do this, she said, her voice quiet but determined. I want to get better. I want to be good enough to be here. I stopped walking for a moment, turning to face her. You already are good enough, I said, my voice firm. And you're going to keep getting better. I'll help you, every step of the way. She smiled, just a little, but it was the kind of smile that spoke volumes. I could see the hope in her eyes, the spark that had been missing for so long. Over the next few weeks, Lila threw herself into her art with a newfound determination. She attended after-school classes, joined local workshops, and even started submitting some of her work to small competitions. It wasn't easy, and there were days when she doubted herself, days when the fear of failure crept in. But each time, she pushed through. She had found something she was passionate about, something that gave her a sense of purpose beyond just surviving. One afternoon, she came to me with a wide grin on her face, holding up a letter in her hand. I did it, she said, her voice filled with excitement. I got my first art show. I stared at her, stunned. That's amazing, Lila. I'm so proud of you. She beamed, her eyes sparkling. I couldn't have done it without you, she said softly. You believed in me when I didn't. And in that moment, I realized just how far she had come. From the quiet, unsure girl who had stepped into my world just a few months ago, to the confident, ambitious young artist standing before me now, ready to take on the world. It wasn't just about the art show. It was about everything she had overcome, everything she had learned about herself. And that, I knew, was only the beginning. I watched as Lila's confidence continued to grow. The art show had been a huge success. People were admiring her work, talking to her about her pieces, and she was handling it all with a grace I hadn't expected. It wasn't just about the recognition. It was about the way she had started to believe in herself. That night, we celebrated together, just the two of us. There was no fancy dinner, no grand gesture, just a quiet evening with takeout pizza and a movie. And yet, it felt like a celebration of everything she had accomplished, everything she had overcome. As we sat on the couch, watching the movie, Lila's phone buzzed. She picked it up, her face lighting up when she saw the message. It was from one of her classmates, a girl she had started to talk to more since the bullying had stopped. They want me to join the art club, Lila said, her voice filled with surprise. They said I have potential and that they'd love to have me in the group. I turned to her, a proud smile tugging at my lips. That's fantastic, Lila. I'm so happy for you. She looked at me for a moment, her eyes still wide with disbelief. I never thought anyone would want me in a group like that, she said softly. I always thought I was different, that I didn't belong. I shook my head gently. You're not different in a bad way, Lila. You're different in a way that makes you stand out. People are drawn to your strength, your talent. They see what I see. Lila's eyes glistened for a moment, and she quickly looked down at her phone, typing a response to her friend. Thank you, she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. It was the first time I'd seen her say those words with genuine sincerity, not out of obligation, but because she truly felt it. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of happiness, and as I watched her, I knew she was on the path to something incredible. But it wasn't just about the art or the recognition. It was about how she was beginning to see herself in a new light. The next few weeks were a blur of new beginnings for Lila. She joined the art club, attended meetings after school, and even made a few new friends. They admired her work, listened to her ideas, and included her in their plans. It wasn't easy, though. There were still moments of self-doubt, moments when she wanted to pull back, to hide, to retreat into the comfort of her old life. But she didn't. Each time, she fought through it. She was becoming someone new, someone who wasn't afraid to take up space, someone who believed that she had a right to be here, in this world, with all its complexities and challenges. One afternoon, I took Lila to a local art gallery. It wasn't as fancy as the one we had visited months ago, but it was a place where local artists showcased their work. I thought it would be a good opportunity for her to see the range of artists, the different styles, and perhaps inspire her further. We walked through the gallery, taking in the art, discussing the pieces, and talking about her own work. It was during one of these conversations that Lila turned to me, her expression serious. "I want to do this," she said quietly. "I want to be an artist. I don't just want to make art for myself anymore. I want to share it with the world. I want to tell my story through my work." My heart swelled with pride. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when Lila finally recognized her own worth. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, and she was dreaming. "You're going to be incredible, Lila," I said, my voice full of certainty. "I believe in you." Lila smiled, a full, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but strong. It was a simple phrase, but it carried so much weight. She was no longer the shy, uncertain girl I had first met. She was becoming someone new, someone with purpose and ambition. As we left the gallery that day, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. I had watched her grow, watched her find her confidence, and watched her begin to believe in herself. I knew there would still be challenges ahead, still moments of doubt, but I also knew that Lila was capable of facing whatever came her way. She had the strength, the talent, and the heart to make her dreams come true. And I would be there, cheering her on, every step of the way. I knew something was off the moment I saw Lila that morning. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her breakfast untouched, her gaze distant, lost in thought. It was like the spark that had been in her eyes, for the past few weeks, had suddenly dimmed. I had seen this before, the signs of her retreating into herself, the way her shoulders slumped and her fingers nervously twitched. It was like watching someone step back from something they wanted, afraid that they might not deserve it. I walked over and sat across from her, not saying anything at first, just letting the silence hang between us. Lila didn't look up. "Hey," I said softly, trying to draw her attention. "What's going on?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared at the untouched cereal in front of her, her eyes unfocused, as though she wasn't seeing anything at all. "I just don't know if I can keep doing this," she said finally, her voice quieter than usual. "Doing what?" I asked, leaning forward, my concern deepening. She looked up at me then, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "All of it. School, art, being here. I don't know if I belong." The words hit me harder than I expected. I had seen the progress she had made, the small steps she had taken toward believing in herself, but now I understood what had been simmering under the surface. This wasn't just about school or art. This was about her sense of self-worth. She had been given a new life, but she was still struggling to believe she deserved it. I reached out and placed my hand over hers, gently. "Lila," I said softly, my voice full of reassurance. "You are not alone in this. You belong here, with me, with everyone who sees the incredible person you are." She pulled her hand back, her brows furrowed. "But what if I don't fit in? What if I'm just pretending?" I shook my head. "You're not pretending, Lila. I see you. I see your strength, your talent, everything you've been through. You've come so far." Her eyes darted away from me, and she crossed her arms over her chest. "I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm just waiting for the moment when everyone realizes I don't belong here." The words broke something inside me. It wasn't just the pain of hearing her doubt herself. It was the realization that she didn't yet see her own worth. "I understand that it feels hard right now," I said, my voice gentle. "But this is a journey. It's not going to happen overnight. You've been through so much, and it takes time to adjust. But you are stronger than you think. You've proven that already." She let out a sigh, but it wasn't one of relief. It was a sigh of frustration, of wanting to believe but not being able to. I couldn't just tell her that everything would be okay. She had to find that on her own. But I knew I had to help her see that she had already started down the path. "You know," I said, trying to change the subject to something a little lighter, "you've been doing a lot of amazing work with your art. Have you thought about what you want to do next?" Her eyes flickered for a moment, but she didn't respond. I could see that she wasn't ready to talk about her future just yet, so I didn't push it. Instead, I sat beside her and just kept her company. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was just that moment before something big was about to shift. I knew she needed time to process everything, to let it all sink in. Later that evening, when I checked in on her before bed, Lila was sitting on the edge of her bed, sketching in her notebook. The familiar look of concentration was back on her face. I stood in the doorway, watching her for a moment. "How's it going?" I asked, careful not to interrupt her. She looked up at me, her eyes softer than before. It's going. I've been thinking about some new ideas. She hesitated before adding, maybe I'm not pretending after all. A small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. I walked over and sat beside her, glancing at the sketches she had been working on. The drawings were full of emotion, full of life. They were everything she had been trying to hide, everything she had been afraid to show the world. These are amazing, I said quietly. You're incredible, Lila. She smiled fully then, and for the first time in a long time, I saw that spark in her eyes again. It wasn't a huge change, not a complete turnaround, but it was something. It was a glimmer of belief, of hope, something that had been buried for so long. Thanks, she whispered, her voice small but strong. Maybe I can do this after all. I reached over and gave her a small pat on the back. I know you can, I said with complete certainty. One step at a time. She nodded, her fingers lightly brushing over the pages of her sketchbook. There was still work to be done. There would be struggles ahead. But for the first time, Lila was beginning to see herself not as the girl who didn't belong, but as someone worthy of all the good things coming her way. I knew that this was the beginning of something powerful. This was only the first of many steps. But Lila was no longer standing still. She was moving forward, and that was enough for now. I had no idea how much things would change after that night. It was only a few weeks since Lila had started to believe in herself again, and already I could see the difference in the way she held herself. There were still days of self-doubt, moments where the weight of the past seemed to pull her back, but those days were fewer now. She was learning, growing, and starting to understand that she had a place in this world. But even as she thrived, I could feel a growing tension, something in the air that I couldn't ignore. I had promised her a life where she was safe, where she could finally feel like she belonged. But the past had a way of catching up to people, no matter how far they tried to run from it. One evening, as we sat in the living room, I received a call. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. Mr. Grayson. A voice on the other end said, sharp and insistent. We need to talk about Lila. My heart dropped. I glanced over at her. She was sitting on the couch, lost in a book, completely unaware of the conversation unfolding on the phone. What about her? I asked, my voice steady but with an edge of concern creeping in. We've come across some information, the voice continued. Something you might want to know? It's about her mother. I stiffened. Ruth had been a figure in Lila's life that I had always respected, but I didn't know her full story. I didn't know what demons had followed her, or what secrets she had left behind. What do you mean? I asked, the unease in my chest growing. The voice on the other end didn't hesitate. There are things in Ruth's past that are resurfacing. You need to know that they may affect Lila. I felt my blood run cold. What things? I demanded. The silence on the other end of the phone was palpable before the voice spoke again, quieter this time. There are people looking for her, Mr. Grayson. People who want to bring her back. I couldn't breathe. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Lila's mother had been a mystery. She had disappeared years ago without a trace, and Lila had been left to grow up without any real understanding of her mother's past. But now, it seemed like that past was about to collide with her present. I quickly ended the call and turned to Lila. She was still reading, unaware of the conversation I had just had. My heart ached as I tried to figure out how to approach this. I didn't want to tell her. I didn't want to burden her with the fear that the past might come for her, too. But I knew I had to. I had promised her safety, and I couldn't keep that promise if I didn't tell her what was going on. I walked over to her and sat down beside her. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine with a hint of curiosity. Lila, I began, my voice quieter than I wanted it to be. There's something we need to talk about. Her face softened, sensing the shift in my tone. What is it? She asked, her voice still full of the trust one had worked so hard to earn. It's about your mom, I said, choosing my words carefully. There's some information that's come up about her past. About people who are looking for you. The air between us thickened. Lila didn't speak for a moment, her eyes searching my face for any sign of what this meant. What do you mean? She whispered, her voice barely audible. What do you mean they're looking for me? I took a deep breath, my chest tightening with the weight of this conversation. I don't know all the details yet, but there are people from your mother's past who want to find you. They think you know something about her, something they want. Her face paled, and I could see the fear rising in her eyes. She had been through so much already, and now this was too much to ask. I reached out, placing my hand on hers, trying to offer comfort. Listen to me. I said gently. I'm not going to let anything happen to you. I promise. She didn't pull her hand away, but I could feel the tension in her body. I don't understand, she said, her voice trembling. Why are they looking for me? What do they want? I hesitated. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew that I had to protect her from this, whatever it was. I don't know, Lila, but I will find out, and I will make sure you're safe. I won't let them hurt you. She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She didn't know who to trust or what to believe. The world she had known had been full of pain and uncertainty, and this new reality, felt fragile to her. We'll deal with this together, I added softly. You're not alone in this, Lila. Not anymore. She looked at me, her expression torn, unsure of what to say next. I know, she whispered, but I'm scared. I don't want to go back to the way things were. I pulled her into a gentle hug, trying to offer the kind of comfort I knew she needed. You don't have to go back. You're with me now, and I won't let anything take that away from you. As she rested her head on my shoulder, I made a silent vow to protect her, no matter what. The past might have been catching up with us, but I wasn't going to let it win. Not now. Not ever. I stood there in the living room, the weight of the situation settling around me like a heavy fog. The words from the call earlier that day echoed in my mind, and I could feel my heart racing in my chest. People were coming for Lila. They had been after her mother, and now, somehow, they had turned their attention to Lila. I had promised her that she was safe, that she would be protected, but now the past was creeping in, threatening to tear everything apart. I glanced at Lila, who was sitting on the couch, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. I knew she was trying to understand, to make sense of what I had just told her. But how could I explain this? How could I make her understand that, despite everything I had done to keep her safe, there were forces at play beyond our control? She looked up at me, her face pale, her eyes full of doubt. What does this mean? She asked, her voice small, almost trembling. Who are they? What do they want from me? I sat down next to her, my mind racing for the right words. How could I explain something so complicated, something so dark, without frightening her further? I don't know everything, I said slowly, my voice calm but firm. But I know that your mother was involved with some people who— I paused, trying to choose my words carefully. Who are dangerous. They've been looking for her for a long time, and now they think you know something that they want. Lila stared at me, her face a mixture of fear and confusion. Why me? She whispered, as if the question itself was too much for her to even ask. Why would they care about me? I could see the pain in her eyes, the same pain that had haunted her for so long. She had spent so many years hiding, surviving, trying to stay out of the way of people who might hurt her. And now, all of that was coming to a head. You're not just anyone, Lila, I said, my voice steady, though the weight of what I was saying made my chest tight. You're not just your mother's daughter. You're you. And whatever it is they're looking for, they believe you have the answers. Her breath caught in her throat, and I could see her struggling to make sense of everything. She had already been through so much. She had already fought so hard just to get here, to believe in herself, to start a new life. And now, it felt like everything was falling apart. I won't let them hurt you, I said firmly, placing my hand on hers. You're safe here with me. I promise you that. We're going to handle this, and I'm not going to let anyone take you away from this life you've started to build. She didn't say anything at first, just staring at me with those wide, innocent eyes. For a moment, I wondered if she believed me, if she trusted me enough to let me protect her. Then, after a long pause, she spoke again. But what if they come here? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What if they find me? What if I'm not safe anymore? The fear in her voice pierced through me like a knife. I had promised her safety, a chance at a better life, but now it felt like I was on the verge of breaking that promise. I won't let them get to you, I repeated, my voice resolute. We're going to figure this out, Lila, and I'll make sure you're protected, no matter what it takes. I could see the doubt still lingering in her eyes, but there was something else there too, a flicker of hope, however small. She wasn't giving up yet. She was still holding on, still trusting that I would be able to keep her safe. I knew we couldn't stay passive anymore. The time for hiding was over. We needed to act. I'm going to find out who's behind this, I said, my voice low and determined. And I'll make sure they don't get to you. Lila nodded, though I could tell she was still frightened. She was a child, and she shouldn't have to face something like this. But she was stronger than she realized, and I would do everything I could to help her realize that. I stood up, my mind already planning the next steps. I'll keep you safe, I said, more to myself than to her, but she heard me. And no one is going to take you from here. Lila watched me for a moment, and then, for the first time that evening, she managed a small, uncertain smile. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Thank you, she whispered. I nodded, giving her a reassuring smile. I had no idea what we were about to face, but I knew one thing for sure. I would protect her, and together, we would face whatever came next. As I stepped out of the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The past had caught up with us, and the fight for Lila's future was just beginning. I had never seen Lila like this before. The fear in her eyes was palpable as she stood by the window, watching the shadows of the night stretch across the lawn. I could feel her anxiety radiating through the room, even as I tried to reassure her that everything would be okay. But I knew she wasn't convinced. The past had a way of making itself known, and the threats I had promised to protect her from were slowly closing in. It had been days since the call, and still no clear answers had emerged. The people from Ruth's past were searching for Lila, their motives unclear, but their presence, their need to find her, was undeniable. I was no longer just dealing with Lila's future. I was dealing with forces that had the potential to rip everything apart. Lila hadn't spoken much about the people looking for her, but I could tell that she was feeling the weight of it all. She had already lost so much, and now it seemed like her past was trying to reclaim her, to drag her back into a life she had worked so hard to escape. I walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. She flinched slightly, but didn't pull away. Lila, I said gently, I know you're scared. And I'm scared too. But we're going to get through this. We'll figure it out. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with doubt. How? She asked quietly. How can we stop them from coming after me? How can I just go on pretending everything's okay when I know they're out there? I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know exactly what these people wanted or what they would do if they found her. But what I did know was that Lila had come so far. She had overcome more than I could have ever imagined, and I wasn't about to let her fall back into the shadows. You don't have to pretend, Lila, I said softly. It's okay to be scared. I'm scared too, but we're in this together. We'll face this together. She nodded, her expression still unsure, but there was a flicker of something. Hope, maybe. I don't want to go back to that life, she whispered, her voice trembling. I don't want to go back to hiding, to running. I want to stay here, with you, where it's safe. My heart ached for her. I could see how much she was struggling, how much this fear was holding her back from truly living. But it wasn't just the fear of being found. It was the fear of being taken back to a life she had no control over. You won't go back to that life, I promised, my voice firm with conviction. I won't let anyone take you. I will protect you, no matter what it takes. She looked at me for a long time, as if weighing my words. Then, finally, she spoke. I believe you, she said, her voice small but filled with sincerity. But what if they come for me anyway? I took a deep breath, my mind racing with possibilities. Then we fight back, I said, my voice steady. We don't hide. We stand strong, together. For the first time in a long time, I saw a glimmer of strength in her eyes. She wasn't backing down. She wasn't going to let fear dictate her life anymore. And I wasn't going to let it dictate mine either. That night, I made a few calls. I needed to find out more about the people searching for Lila. I needed to understand what they wanted and how to stop them. But as I sat there, staring at the phone in my hand, I realized something. I wasn't just fighting for Lila anymore. I was fighting for myself too. Fighting for the life I had built, the life I wanted to protect. But more than that, I was fighting for Lila's future. I wasn't about to let her go back to the shadows. Not now. Not ever. The next morning, I woke up early and found Lila already sitting in the living room, staring out the window again. She was lost in thought, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. I walked over and sat beside her, not saying anything at first, just letting her know I was there. What's on your mind? I asked quietly. She didn't answer right away. For a moment, I thought she might not respond at all. But then she looked at me, her eyes full of something I hadn't seen before, determination. I'm not going to let them win, she said, her voice steady. I'm not going to let them take me back to that life. I'm going to fight. I could hear the strength in her voice, and for the first time, I truly believed she meant it. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everything she had worked for, everything she had become. I smiled at her, feeling a deep sense of pride in that moment. That's my girl, I said, my voice full of pride. We're going to face this together, and we're going to win. She nodded, her gaze focused and unwavering. I knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be more obstacles, more challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the same page. Together, we could face whatever came next. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: we weren't going to back down. We would fight, and we would win. I could feel the pressure building, the weight of everything we had been through pressing down on me like a heavy storm cloud. Lila had stepped up in ways I never expected, showing resilience and strength beyond her years. But the people from her mother's past were closing in, and I couldn't ignore the feeling that time was running out. We had been preparing, watching for any signs, and still, I could sense the threat lingering in the background, just out of reach, but ever present. There was only one thing left to do. We needed to move. It wasn't an easy decision, and it wasn't one I took lightly. But the safety of Lila was my #1 priority, and I couldn't risk waiting for the storm to hit. The day we decided to leave, I watched as Lila packed her things, her face focused but unreadable. It was clear that the life we had built together, the safety she had begun to feel, was about to be upended. She didn't ask many questions. She simply did as I asked, packing her belongings and following my lead. We both knew it was for the best, but that didn't make it any easier. I had made sure all the arrangements were in place. A small house on the outskirts of the city, away from the noise, the pressure, and most importantly, the people who had been looking for her. It was far from the luxury she had grown accustomed to, but it was safe. And that was all that mattered. As we drove away, I glanced at her. She was staring out the window, her face a mixture of apprehension and determination. I knew she wasn't thrilled about leaving everything behind, but I also knew that she understood the necessity of it. "We'll be okay," I said, my voice calm but filled with a certainty I didn't quite feel. "This is temporary. We'll figure things out, Lila." She nodded, her eyes not leaving the passing scenery. "I know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's just, everything feels different now. Everything's changing so fast." I reached over and squeezed her hand, offering what little reassurance I could. "Change is hard," I said, "but we'll adapt. You'll see. This new place, it's going to be just what we need. A fresh start." The drive felt longer than usual, the weight of the situation making the time stretch on endlessly. When we finally arrived, I could see her looking around, taking in the small house with its modest yard and simple surroundings. It wasn't much, but it was ours. It was a place where she could feel safe, a place where she could start to rebuild without the looming threat of danger hanging over her head. "What do you think?" I asked, watching her carefully. She didn't answer right away, but I could see her taking it all in, her mind processing everything. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "It's different," she said softly, "but I think I can get used to it." I smiled, relieved. "Good. That's all I'm asking for. A little time to settle in. We'll make it work." As we began to unload the car and settle in, I could see a small sense of calm settle over her. The worry was still there, but it was buried under the quiet peace of the moment. This place, for all its simplicity, gave us something we hadn't had in a long time: peace. That night, as we sat down to dinner, Lila seemed more relaxed than I had seen her in weeks. She still wasn't fully at ease, but I could see that she was starting to adjust. There was a new sense of hope in her eyes, a flicker of optimism that had been missing for so long. "I like it here," she said, her voice small but genuine. "It's quiet, and I don't feel so exposed." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I know it's not what you're used to, but we'll make it work. We have each other, and that's all that matters." As the days went by, Lila started to open up more. She drew more often, her artwork evolving into something deeper, more personal. I could see that she was using her art as a way to express the things she couldn't put into words. It was a quiet, powerful form of therapy for her, and I couldn't help but be proud of how far she had come. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living. One afternoon, I sat down with her as she was sketching, her concentration so intense that she barely noticed me sitting beside her. "Lila," I said softly, "you're doing great. I want you to know that. I know this hasn't been easy, but I'm proud of you. You've handled everything with so much strength." She looked up at me, her expression softening. Thanks, she whispered, her voice filled with quiet gratitude. I don't know where I'd be without you. I shook my head. You're stronger than you think. I'm just here to help you find your way. We sat there for a while, just enjoying the peace of the moment. I knew that we had a long way to go, that there would be challenges ahead. But for the first time in a while, I felt hopeful. We had made it through the worst of it, and no matter what happened next, we would face it together. The road ahead was uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure. We were not turning back. We had made it this far, and nothing was going to stop us now. I could feel the tension in the air the moment I stepped into the house. It wasn't the usual calm that I had grown accustomed to since moving into this new life with Lila. This was different, heavier, like something was lurking just beyond our reach, waiting for the right moment to strike. Lila was in the living room, sitting by the window, her sketchbook open but forgotten in her lap. She wasn't drawing, wasn't focused on anything. Her eyes were distant, lost somewhere far away. I didn't need to ask what was wrong. I could see it in her eyes. She was feeling the weight of everything that had happened. She was trying to hold on to the hope that things would be okay, but deep down, I knew she was scared. I sat down beside her, gently pulling the sketchbook from her hands and placing it on the table. Hey, I said softly, trying to break the silence. She didn't respond at first, her gaze still focused on the view outside. But I could see the way her fingers fidgeted with the edge of the cushion, the way her body was tense. Talk to me, Lila, I said, my voice steady but filled with concern. She looked at me then, her eyes filled with a mixture of frustration and fear. I can't do this anymore, she whispered. I'm so tired, but I don't know how to stop. I don't know how to make it go away. My heart ached for her. I had seen her fight so hard, so fiercely, to build something better for herself. But the past kept following her, haunting her every step. It wasn't fair, and I hated that she had to go through this. You don't have to fight alone, I said gently, placing a hand on hers. We'll figure this out together, Lila. We're not running anymore. We'll face it. She looked at me, her expression softening for the first time in what felt like days. I want to believe that, she said quietly. I want to believe that everything will be okay, but I don't know how. I sighed, my fingers brushing through her hair, offering what comfort I could. I know it's scary, but you're stronger than you think. You've already fought so much, and we've come so far. She nodded, though I could still see the doubt in her eyes. I'm just tired of looking over my shoulder, she whispered. I just want to be free of all of it. I squeezed her hand, knowing there was no quick fix, no magic words to take away the fear. All I could offer was my support, my promise to be there no matter what. You will be free, Lila, I said with quiet determination. It's going to take time, but we'll get there. Together. The next few days passed in a blur of careful planning. I made sure the house was secure, doubled down on the measures I had already put in place to protect us. I wasn't about to let the past steal the future we had fought so hard to create. But despite my efforts, I could feel the weight of the danger lurking just beyond our door. Lila, too, was on edge, her anxiety growing with every passing day. I could see it in the way she flinched at every car that passed by, every unfamiliar knock on the door. I knew she was doing her best to push through, but the fear was starting to take its toll. It wasn't just the fear of the people searching for her. It was the weight of not knowing if she could ever fully escape her past, if she could ever truly find peace. I spent more time with her, trying to ease her fears, distracting her with small moments of normalcy. We took walks in the quiet neighborhood, enjoyed movie nights, and I encouraged her to keep drawing. It wasn't much, but it was enough to offer a semblance of peace, a reminder that we were still alive, still fighting. But I knew it wouldn't be enough to keep the fear at bay forever. I could feel the storm brewing, the danger closing in, and I had no idea when it would hit. Then, one evening, everything changed. The doorbell rang. It wasn't the usual knock. There was something about it, something urgent, something that didn't belong. I stood up quickly, my heart pounding in my chest as I looked at Lila. She was frozen, her eyes wide with fear. Stay here, I said quietly, my voice calm but with an edge of warning. I walked toward the door slowly, my hand hovering over the handle, feeling the weight of the moment. When I opened the door, I was face to face with someone I never expected. A man, late 30s, dressed in a suit, his face calm but with a hint of urgency in his eyes. Mr. Grayson, he asked, his voice steady. I need to speak with you. It's about Lila. I felt my blood run cold. Lila's past had found its way to our door, and I wasn't sure whether to trust this man or send him away. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice sharp. "What do you want with her?" The man hesitated, his eyes flicking toward Lila, who had quietly come up behind me. "I'm with the authorities," he said carefully. "We've been tracking the individuals who've been searching for Lila, and we need to speak with her. It's important." My mind raced, my thoughts clouded with doubt and suspicion. I had promised Lila safety, and here was someone who seemed to be from the very system that was supposed to protect her, but something didn't feel right. I turned to Lila, whose face was pale, her eyes filled with both confusion and fear. I could see the panic starting to creep in. "It's okay," I said, turning to face her, my voice gentle but firm. "We'll figure this out. You're safe, no matter what." I turned back to the man. "What's going on?" I demanded. "What's this really about?" I could feel the tension in the air as the man stepped closer, his eyes never leaving mine. He wasn't in any kind of uniform, but the way he carried himself made it clear he wasn't just some random stranger. My instincts were on high alert. There was something about him that made my skin crawl, something I couldn't quite place, but that feeling deep in my gut told me I needed to be careful. I glanced at Lila, who was standing just behind me, her expression a mixture of fear and confusion. She had already been through so much, and now this man was standing on our doorstep, claiming to be with the authorities. But why hadn't I been informed? Why hadn't I heard anything from the police? I could tell she was scared, and that made me even more protective. She had been through enough already. She didn't deserve this kind of fear. I took a step forward, blocking her from the man's line of sight. "I don't know who you are," I said, my voice firm, "but I don't believe you. You haven't given me any proof that you're actually with the authorities." The man's eyes narrowed, but his expression remained calm. "I understand your concerns," he said, his voice steady but tinged with impatience. "But I'm afraid this is urgent. It's about Lila's safety. There are people who are still after her, and we need to speak with her to protect her properly." My heart skipped a beat at his words. It was exactly what I had been afraid of. The people from Lila's past, the ones I thought I had kept at bay, were still out there, and they weren't giving up. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "If you're really from the authorities," I said, "then you should have reached out to me first. I'm her guardian. You don't talk to her without my consent." The man's eyes flicked toward Lila again, his gaze softening slightly, but he didn't back off. "I understand, but we're running out of time. Lila's life is at risk, and we need to make sure we have all the information to keep her safe. If you want her to be protected, then you need to trust me." The words hit me hard. I wanted to trust him, I really did. But something didn't sit right. "I'm sorry," I said, shaking my head. "I need more than just your word. I need proof. I need to know that you're really who you say you are." The man sighed, clearly frustrated, but he didn't push any further. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a badge, holding it up for me to see. I took it from his hand cautiously, inspecting it. The badge was official, but I still wasn't entirely convinced. "What's going on, really?" I asked, feeling the urgency in my voice. "Why is all this happening now? Why are you coming to us like this?" The man stepped back slightly, as if preparing to explain. "There's more to Lila's mother's past than you realize. Ruth wasn't just a victim. She was involved in something much bigger, something we've been tracking for years. The people after her are dangerous, and they know that Lila might have information they need. We need her help to stop them." I looked at Lila, whose face had gone pale at the mention of her mother's name. I could see the fear creeping in again, the shadows of her past threatening to take hold of her once more. She had worked so hard to build a new life, and now it felt like everything she had fought for was slipping away. "I don't want to be part of this," she said suddenly, her voice shaky but firm. "I don't want anything to do with these people. I just want to be normal." I crouched down in front of her, gently taking her hands in mine. "You don't have to be part of this, Lila. I'll protect you. But we need to face the truth. We need to stop these people from hurting you, from hurting anyone." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she just stared at me, her eyes filled with confusion and a deep sense of dread. I could see how overwhelmed she was, how terrified of what was coming. "You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with," I added softly. "But we have to make sure they can't hurt you. And if it means helping the authorities, then that's what we'll do. But we're in this together." Lila nodded slowly, but I could still see the fear in her eyes. She wasn't ready to fully accept that she had to face this head on, but she was willing to try. And that was all I could ask for. I turned back to the man, my gaze hardening. I want to know everything. I want to know exactly what's going on, who these people are, and why they're after her. And I want to make sure that she's safe before we do anything. The man seemed to pause for a moment, as if considering whether or not to give me all the information. But finally, he nodded. I'll tell you what I can. But we need to move quickly. Time is running out. The weight of his words sank in, and I knew that things were about to escalate. I turned back to Lila, offering her what comfort I could. We'll figure this out. No matter what happens, we'll get through this together. She nodded, her fingers gripping mine tightly, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the calm sense of certainty wash over me. We were going to face this. We were going to stop these people from coming after her, and we would protect her, no matter the cost. I could see the tension in the air as the man finally left, his message clear. We were not going to get out of this unscathed. The weight of the situation had shifted, and the battle we thought we could control now felt like it was spiraling. The threats against Lila were no longer a distant fear. They were here, and they were real. Lila sat quietly on the couch, her eyes vacant, staring at the floor. I could feel the unease radiating off of her, her body tense, every muscle coiled as if waiting for the next blow. I couldn't blame her. She had been through so much, and now, this new wave of danger was hitting harder than I had ever imagined. I sat beside her, trying to offer some comfort, but the silence between us was deafening. Lila, I finally said, my voice soft but firm. We need to face this. I won't let anything happen to you. We're in this together, and we'll get through it. She didn't look at me at first. Her gaze remained fixed on the floor, her fingers nervously playing with the edge of her sleeve. I knew she wasn't ready to talk, but I couldn't let her shut down, not now. It's okay to be scared, I said, my voice gentle. You don't have to pretend like you're not. We all feel it. But we're not giving up. Not now, not ever. Slowly, she lifted her head, meeting my eyes. There was something different in her gaze, something I hadn't seen before, resilience. It was faint, but it was there. She wasn't going to let fear control her. I'm scared, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But I'm not going to run anymore. I don't want to keep hiding. I felt a surge of pride, seeing her take that step, however small. That's the first step, Lila. You're stronger than you know. The next few days were filled with quiet preparation. The sense of urgency was palpable, and I made sure that every possible measure was taken to ensure Lila's safety. I spoke with a few trusted contacts, arranged for some extra security, and made sure there were no loose ends. But I knew it wasn't enough. The real threat wasn't something I could hide from or fight off with money and resources. It was deeper, more complicated than I had ever anticipated. We had to deal with it head on. It was the only way. One evening, I came home to find Lila standing at the front door, looking out the window, her face pale, her expression distant. I walked over to her, my steps slow, cautious. Lila, I asked softly. She turned to face me, her eyes filled with uncertainty. What if I can't do it? She asked quietly. What if I can't face this? What if I'm not strong enough? I could see the fear in her eyes, the same fear that had haunted her for so long. But this time, it was different. She wasn't just running from the danger. She was running from herself, from the uncertainty that came with embracing her future. You are strong enough, I said, my voice firm, filled with certainty. You've already proven that. You're not the same girl who first walked into my life. You've faced more than anyone should ever have to, and you're still standing. You're stronger than you know, and I'm here to help you every step of the way. She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes searching mine, as if looking for any hint of doubt. There was none. We're going to face this together, I said, reaching out to gently touch her shoulder. You don't have to do this alone. I'm right here, Lila. Always. She nodded slowly, as if accepting my words. I could see the internal battle she was having, but I also saw the flicker of hope, the spark of determination that hadn't been there before. The next morning, we received a call that changed everything. The authorities had finally tracked down the people who had been after Lila's mother, and they were closing in. They had information, dangerous information that could destroy everything we had worked for. I felt a chill run through me as I listened to the officer on the other end. They needed to move fast, and they needed our help. We couldn't run from this anymore. We couldn't hide. The time for action had arrived. We have to do this, I said to Lila, my voice steady despite the chaos unfolding. We have to help them stop these people before they can hurt anyone else. Lila nodded, her face set with determination. She wasn't going to let fear control her anymore. She was ready to fight. Let's do it, she said, her voice strong, full of resolve. And just like that, the battle was no longer just about survival. It was about standing tall in the face of everything that had tried to break her. We were going to take back control. We were going to stop the past from defining us. Together, we would face whatever came next. I watched as Lila stood beside me, her hand resting lightly on the car door, her gaze steady, though I could sense the storm of thoughts and emotions swirling within her. We had just received the call, the one that made everything real, made it clear that there was no turning back. We were about to confront the people who had been chasing her and her mother for years. The time for hiding was over. The time for running was over. It was time to face the truth, no matter how terrifying. Lila was quiet as we drove toward the meeting point, her fingers nervously tapping against her thigh, a silent rhythm that matched the pulse of anxiety in the air. I could see how much this weighed on her, how much it felt like the final test. She wasn't a child anymore. She had grown in ways I never expected, but even the strongest had their breaking points. Are you okay? I asked softly, glancing at her for a moment before focusing back on the road. She didn't answer at first, her eyes fixed out the window, watching the world blur by. It was as if she was trying to process everything that had happened in the past weeks, everything that had led us to this moment. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I'm ready for this, she said, her words heavy with doubt. I don't know if I can do it. I could hear the fear in her voice, and it made my chest tighten. I had promised her that we would face this together, that I would be there to protect her. But this was different. This was more than just facing her past. This was a battle for her future. I reached over and placed my hand on hers, offering a small squeeze. You don't have to be ready, Lila. You don't have to have it all figured out. But you've come so far already. And no matter what happens today, you've already proven how strong you are. She looked at me then, her eyes filled with vulnerability. What if I'm not strong enough? She asked quietly, her voice trembling slightly. What if I can't handle it? I could see the weight of her question, and I understood it. She had been through so much, and now, here she was, facing the one thing she couldn't control, the people who had been chasing her, and her mother. But I also knew something else. Lila was stronger than she realized. She had already faced so many things that would have broken most people, and she was still standing. Lila, I said, gently, you are stronger than you know. And I'm here. I'm right here with you, every step of the way. You don't have to do this alone. She nodded, her eyes steady now, though the fear still lingered beneath the surface. I knew she wasn't completely convinced, but I also knew she was ready to try. When we arrived at the meeting point, a small, unmarked building on the outskirts of the city, I could feel the tension in the air thickening. I could sense the urgency, the quiet anxiety that both Lila and I were trying to hide. I parked the car and turned off the engine, the sudden silence in the car deafening. Stay close, I said softly, though I knew Lila didn't need to be told. She was already close to me, her body tense and alert, ready for whatever was to come. We walked into the building together, the air cold and sterile inside, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead the only sound. As we reached the door at the end of the hallway, I could see a group of people gathered inside, officials, men and women in suits, all standing around a table covered in documents and files. One of them, a man in his 40s with dark, sharp eyes, looked up as we entered. Mr. Grayson, he said, nodding in our direction. And you must be Lila. His tone was professional, but there was something else there, something that made my spine straighten. Lila didn't respond, just stood there, her gaze fixed on the man. The silence in the room stretched for a moment, thick with anticipation. I could see the weight of it on Lila, the pressure of finally confronting the people who had been after her for so long. This way, the man said, motioning to the table. We need to talk. As we sat down, I could feel Lila's body stiffening beside me. She was afraid. I could see it in the way her hands gripped the edge of the chair, her knuckles white. But she didn't pull away. She didn't retreat. She sat there, facing what she had been avoiding for so long. The man spoke again, his voice steady but urgent. We've been tracking the group that's been after your mother for years. We have intel that suggests they've been looking for you because they believe you have something they need. Lila's eyes widened, and I could see the fear in her gaze, the weight of what he was saying sinking in. What do they want from me? She asked, her voice small. The man looked at her for a long moment, his expression serious. They believe you know something about your mother's past, something that could lead them to the answers they've been searching for, and they're not going to stop until they get it. I could feel the tension in the room building. This wasn't just about protecting Lila anymore. This was about stopping these people from tearing apart everything she had worked so hard to build. We'll make sure you're safe, the man continued. But you need to help us understand what they're looking for. We need to know what your mother left behind, and what they're hoping to find through you. I could see Lila's struggle, the way her emotions warred inside her. She didn't want to be part of this. She didn't want to face the truth about her mother's past. But I also saw something else, the quiet determination in her eyes. She had been through too much to back down now. She was ready to fight, even if she didn't know how. And together, we would face whatever came next. I watched as Lila sat there, her fingers lightly tapping against the table, her eyes focused on the documents in front of her. The room was silent, filled only with the sound of rustling papers and the occasional murmur from the people who had been working with us. The threat that had loomed over us for so long was finally starting to unravel, but it wasn't over. Not yet. We had learned so much, but there was still a long way to go. The people who had been after Lila's mother, the ones who had been chasing her for years, were still out there. But now, we knew more about them. We knew what they wanted. And, most importantly, we knew how to stop them. I looked at Lila, watching her as she studied the information. There was a calmness in her now, a quiet strength that had been building ever since she had taken that first step toward facing her past. She wasn't the same girl who had walked into this new life, afraid of what might happen. She was different, stronger, more confident. And I knew that she would face whatever came next with the same resilience she had shown all along. As we sat there, waiting for the next move, I couldn't help but think about everything we had been through. The fear, the doubt, the uncertainty. But now we had a plan. We had the knowledge, the resources, and most importantly, we had each other. And that made all the difference. We're going to be okay, I said softly, my voice filled with quiet conviction. Lila looked up at me, her eyes steady. And for the first time, I saw the certainty in her that had always been inside her, waiting to emerge. I know, she said, her voice steady. I think I'm ready now. Ready to face it all. Ready to stop running. I smiled, a sense of pride swelling in my chest. You've always been ready, Lila. You just needed to see it for yourself. She smiled back, the first real smile I had seen from her in days. And for the first time, I believed it. We had come this far, and now we were going to finish what we started. The rest of the day was spent putting everything into motion. The authorities had everything they needed, and they were taking the necessary steps to ensure that Lila would be safe. We couldn't do this alone, and we didn't have to. We had people on our side, people who were committed to helping us bring this to an end. The following weeks were filled with meetings, phone calls, and constant updates. But amidst all of it, Lila remained calm. She stayed focused, keeping her mind on the goal, the future she was building for herself. I could see how much she had changed. The fear was still there, but it wasn't consuming her anymore. She had learned to embrace her strength, to trust herself. And slowly, I watched her build the life she had always dreamed of. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of doubt. But with each step, she grew stronger, more confident in who she was. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living. And one day, not too long from that moment, I found myself standing beside Lila at an art show, watching her showcase her latest pieces. The room was filled with people admiring her work, talking to her about her journey, about the emotions that poured into her paintings. And for the first time, I saw it. The pride in her eyes, the joy of seeing herself for who she truly was. She had found her place, and she was shining. You did it, I said, standing beside her, my voice filled with awe. I knew you could. She smiled, her eyes lighting up with happiness. I couldn't have done it without you, she said softly, her voice full of gratitude. You helped me believe in myself. I shook my head, placing a hand on her shoulder. You always had it in you, Lila. I just helped you see it. She smiled again, and in that moment, I knew that everything had been worth it. All the struggles, all the fears, all the uncertainty, it had led us here, to this moment of triumph. Lila was no longer the scared, uncertain girl I had first met. She was a young woman with a future, with dreams, with the strength to achieve them. And I knew, without a doubt, that she was ready to take on whatever came next. The past no longer had a hold on her. She had reclaimed her life, and nothing was going to stop her now. Together, we had faced the darkness, and now we were standing in the light.